Welcome to New American Mythos, where old stories are kindled like firelight, and we gather round to remember the tales that shaped us. Last time, we wandered with Rip Van Winkle into the deep Catskill woods, where a flagon of ghostly liquor and the echo of ninepins sent him into a sleep beyond time. Tonight, he awakens. This is not just a tale of a man who slept too long. It's about waking into a world that has moved on and no longer has space for who you used to be. A world changed, swiftly, utterly, and without waiting. Rip's temptation wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rebellion or defiance. It was the gentler lure of escape, the slow, quiet seduction of forgetting. Not a failure of strength, but of will. He drifted from duty, choosing rest over resolve and quiet over communion. He let the burdens of family, of work, and of place slip from his shoulders. And when he returns, he finds that while he slept, others endured, changed, and remembered. This is a story about duty lost and the strange, aching beauty of waking up too late. Let us return to the tale. Rip Van Winkle by Washington Irving, Part 2. As he approached the village, he met a number of people, but none whom he knew, which somewhat surprised him, for he had thought himself acquainted with everyone in the surrounding countryside. Their dress, too, was of a different fashion than he was used to. They all stared at him with equal signs of surprise, and whenever they looked at him, they invariably stroked their chins. The constant repetition of this gesture led Rip unconsciously to do the same, and, to his astonishment, he found his beard had grown a foot long. He had now reached the outskirts of the village. A troop of unfamiliar children ran at his heels, hooting and pointing at his gray beard. The dogs, too, none of whom he recognized as old companions, barked at him as he passed. The village itself was altered. It was larger and more populous. Rows of houses appeared that he had never seen before, and those which had once been his familiar haunts had vanished. Strange names were painted over the doors. Unfamiliar faces looked out from the windows. Everything was strange. A sense of unease gripped him. He began to doubt whether he or the world around him were bewitched. Surely this was his native village, the same he had left the day before. There stood the Catskill Mountains, and there flowed the silver Hudson River in the distance. Every hill and dale appeared just as it always had. "That flagon last night," he thought, "has muddled my poor head sadly." It was with some difficulty that he found the way to his own house, which he approached with silent awe, expecting at any moment to hear the shrill voice of Dame Van Winkle. He found the house fallen into decay. The roof had collapsed, the windows shattered, and the doors hanging from their hinges. A half-starved dog that looked like Wolf skulked about. Rip called him by name, but the cur snarled, bared its teeth, and moved on. This was a cruel blow indeed. "My very dog," sighed poor Rip, "has forgotten me." He entered the house, which, to tell the truth, Dame Van Winkle had always kept in neat order. It was now empty, forlorn, and seemingly abandoned. This desolation overcame all his fears of conjugal scolding. He called loudly for his wife and children. The lonely chambers echoed his voice for a moment, and then fell silent once more. Let's pause here for a moment. Rip wakes, but he wakes to absence. Familiar hills, familiar sky, but every face, every doorway is strange. He is a man forgotten by his dog, rejected by his home, and chased from the life he once knew. Irving does not shout this moment. he lets it ache quietly. And perhaps we feel that ache too, because we know what it is to wake and find things have moved on without us. What Rip shows us is that forgetting, whether done by time or by choice, always leaves something behind. And not just small forgetting, not where we left our keys or what we meant to buy, but the deep kind, the kind that lets go of people, of roles, of responsibility, the kind that avoids the demands of love and labor. That kind of forgetting does not come without cost. Let's get back into the tale. Rip now hurried out and made for his old haunt, the village inn. But it too was gone. A large, rickety wooden building stood in its place, with wide, gaping windows, some broken and patched with old hats and petticoats. Above the door was painted, "The Union Hotel" by Jonathan Doolittle. In place of the great tree that once shaded the quiet little Dutch tavern of old, there now stood a tall, bare pole, topped with something that looked like a red nightcap, from which fluttered a flag bearing a curious mixture of stars and stripes, altogether strange and bewildering. He recognized, however, on the signboard, the ruby face of King George, under which he had smoked many a peaceful pipe, but even that had been strangely altered. The red coat was replaced with blue and buff, which was kind of a white. The scepter exchanged for a sword, and the head was now adorned not with a crown, but with a cocked hat, and beneath it was painted in bold letters, "General Washington." As usual, a crowd had gathered about the door, but none of the faces were familiar. Even the character of the people seemed changed. Instead of the usual calm and sluggish air, there was a busy, bustling, argumentative tone to the gathering. He looked in vain for old Nicholas Vedder, with his broad face, double chin, and long pipe, puffing clouds of smoke instead of speaking, or for Van Bummel, the schoolmaster, slowly reading aloud from a tattered newspaper. Instead, a lean, sharp-looking fellow with pockets full of handbills was haranguing passionately about the heroes of '76, and many other words that formed a perfect Babylonish jargon to the bewildered Van Winkle. Rip's appearance, with his long, grizzled beard, rusting fowling piece, outdated clothing, and a mob of women and children following him, soon caught the attention of the tavern politicians. They crowded around, inspecting him from head to toe with great curiosity. The orator stepped up and, drawing him aside, asked, "On which side do you vote?" Rip stared in vacant confusion. Another short, busy man tugged his arm and whispered, "Are you a Federal or a Democrat?" Rip was puzzled. Then a stern, self-important man in a sharp, cocked hat elbowed his way through the crowd. Planting himself in front of Rip, with one arm akimbo and the other resting on his cane, he fixed him with a piercing stare and demanded in an austere tone, "What brings you to the election, with a gun on your shoulder and a mob at your heels? Do you intend to stir up a riot in the village?" Let's pause briefly for another moment here. Rip hasn't just woken up into the future. He's walked into a revolution. The tavern where men once smoked in silence is now a political battleground. The red coat of King George has become the blue and buff of General Washington. And Rip? He doesn't even have the language to understand what he's lost. This is the fear beneath the story, that one day our world might change so swiftly that we'll no longer know how to belong in it. And it's not just a personal fear, it's a cultural one. When customs shift and old names are forgotten, identity begins to fray. What binds a people together if not memory, shared language, and a sense of rootedness? It is in moments of upheaval that tradition becomes most fragile, and the soul of a people is tested, not by what they tear down, but by what they choose to keep. Let's return to the story.
"Alas, gentlemen,"
cried Rip, alarmed.
"I'm a poor, quiet man, a native of this place, and a loyal subject of the king. God bless him."
A general shout erupted from the crowd.
"A Tory! A spy! A refugee! Hustle him! Away with him!"
It was only with difficulty that the man in the cocked hat restored order. Assuming an even sterner expression, he again demanded of the unknown intruder what he was doing there and whom he was seeking. The poor man humbly replied that he meant no harm and had only come in search of his old neighbors who used to gather at the tavern.
"Well, who are they? Name them."
Rip thought for a moment.
"Where's Nicholas Vedder?"
There was a short pause, and then an old man answered in a thin, piping voice.
"Nicholas Vedder? Why, he's been dead these 18 years. There used to be a wooden tombstone in the churchyard that told all about him, but that's rotted and gone too." "I see," said Rip. "Where's Brom Dutcher?" "Oh, he went off to the army at the beginning of the war. Some say he died in the storming of Stony Point. Others say he drowned in a squall at the foot of Antony's Nose. I don't know. He never came back." "Well, where is Van Bubble, the schoolmaster?" asked Rip. "He went to war too, became a great militia general, and now he's in Congress."
Rip's heart sank to hear of all these changes among his friends, leaving him alone in a world he no longer understood. Each answer confused him more with talk of vast stretches of time and matters beyond his grasp. War, Congress, Stony Point. He had no courage to ask after anyone else, and cried out in despair, "Does nobody here know of Rip Van Winkle?" "Oh, Rip Van Winkle!" several exclaimed. "Why, yes, there he is, leaning against the tree." Rip looked and saw a man who seemed the exact image of himself as he had been before, equally lazy and certainly as ragged. The poor fellow was now completely bewildered. He doubted whether he was himself or someone else. In the midst of his confusion, the man in the cocked hat again asked his name.
"God knows," cried Rip, completely undone. "I'm not myself. I'm somebody else. That's me yonder. No, he's taken my place. I was myself last night, but I fell asleep on the mountain, and now everything is changed. I don't know my name or who I am."
The onlookers began to glance at one another, nod, wink, and tap their fingers to their foreheads. A whisper spread about securing his gun and keeping the old man from mischief. At this suggestion, the self-important man in the cocked hat quickly withdrew. At that moment, a fresh-faced, kindly woman pushed through the crowd, holding a plump child who began to cry at the sight of Rip. "Hush now, Rip," she said to the child. "Hush, you little fool. The old man won't hurt you." The child's name, the mother's tone, and her look stirred something in Rip's memory.
"What is your name, my good woman?" he asked.
"It is Judith Gardenier."
"And your father's name?" asked Rip.
"Ah, poor man. His name was Rip Van Winkle. But it's been 20 years since he went away with his gun and was never heard from again. His dog came back without him, but no one knows whether he shot himself or was taken by Indians. I was just a little girl then." Rip had one last question to ask, but it came with a faltering voice.
"And your mother?"
"Oh, she died not long ago, burst a blood vessel during a fit of anger at a New England peddler." This news brought Rip a strange comfort. The honest man could no longer contain himself. He embraced his daughter and grandchild.
"I am your father," he cried. "Young Rip Van Winkle once, old Rip Van Winkle now. Does nobody know poor Rip Van Winkle?"
All stood amazed until an old woman tottered out from the crowd, peered into his face, and exclaimed,
Sure enough, it is Rip Van Winkle. Welcome home again, old neighbor. Where have you been these 20 long years?
Let's step back one last time. Rip is saved by one thing: memory. Not his own, for that has failed him, but the memory of others. His daughter remembers his voice, and old woman remembers his face. In a world of flags and new names, it is this kind of memory that holds. It is not law or power that restores Rip. It is love. And not just personal affection, but the shared loves of a people, for kin, for place, for the rituals that knit generations together. A love that holds not just in sentiment, but in story. And so, even as the world changes, something deeper remains. Rip is remembered, not because he was great, but because he was theirs. And in that, there is a kind of redemption. Let's finish the story. Rip's story was soon told, for to him the whole 20 years had seemed no longer than one night. The neighbors stared in astonishment as they heard it. Some were seen to wink at one another and put their tongues in their cheeks. The self-important man in the cocked hat, who returned once the uproar had quieted, screwed his mouth into a doubtful expression and shook his head. This prompted a general shaking of heads among the crowd. It was resolved, however, to consult old Peter Vanderdonk, who was seen slowly approaching up the road. He was descended from the historian of the same name who had written one of the earliest accounts of the province. Peter was the most ancient inhabitant of the village, and well versed in the remarkable traditions and tales of the region. He recognized Rip at once and corroborated his tale in the most convincing manner. He confirmed as a fact passed down from his ancestor, the historian, that the Catskill Mountains had long been haunted by strange beings. It was said that the great Hendrik Hudson himself, the first European to explore the river and the country, was permitted to return every 20 years to revisit the land of his discovery. There he and his ghostly crew of the Half Moon, which was their ship, kept vigil, watching over the river and the great city named for him. Peter claimed his own father had once seen them, dressed in old Dutch clothing, playing ninepins in a mountain hollow, and he himself had heard the sound of their bowling balls like distant thunder one summer afternoon. To make a long story short, the crowd eventually dispersed and returned to the pressing matter of the election. Rip's daughter took him home to live with her. She had a comfortable, well-furnished house and a stout, cheerful husband for a farmer, whom Rip recognized as one of the mischievous boys who used to climb on his back years before. As for Rip's son and namesake, the very image of his father, seen earlier leaning against a tree, he now worked on the farm, though he showed a strong inherited tendency to neglect his duties. Rip resumed his former habits and walks. He soon reconnected with several of his old cronies, though all were somewhat worn by time. He grew especially fond of the younger generation, among whom he quickly became a favorite. Having nothing to do at home, and being at that happy age when idleness is forgiven, he took up his place once more on the bench at the inn door. There he was regarded with great reverence as one of the village patriarchs and a living chronicle of times before the war. It took him some time to catch up with the local gossip and to comprehend the remarkable events that had occurred during his long slumber. That there had been a revolution, that the country had thrown off the yoke of old England, and that he was no longer a subject of His Majesty George III, but a free citizen of the United States. Rip, however, was no politician. Changes of government and empire meant little to him. There was, though, one kind of tyranny under which he had long suffered, the tyranny of petticoat government, which was of an angry wife. Happily, that was over. He had slipped the yoke of matrimony, and could now come and go as he pleased, no longer fearing the sharp tongue of Dame Van Winkle. Yet whenever her name was mentioned, he would shake his head, shrug his shoulders, and roll his eyes, whether in sorrow or relief, none could say. He told his story to every stranger who came to Mr. Doolittle's hotel. At first, he varied in the details each time he recounted it, likely due to the freshness of his awakening. But in time, it settled into the consistent version I have related here. Not a man, woman, or child in the village but knew it by heart. Some continued to doubt its truth and insisted that Rip had gone mad, remaining unhinged on that one topic. The old Dutch settlers, however, gave it full credence. Even now, whenever a thunderstorm rumbles over the Catskills on a summer afternoon, the villagers say that Hendrik Hudson and his crew are at their game of ninepins again, and it is a common wish among the hen-pecked husbands in the neighborhood that they too might somehow find a soothing draught from Rip Van Winkle's mysterious flagon. And so ends the tale of Rip Van Winkle. He did not fight in the war, he did not write laws or shape governments. He slept. But in his waking we see something more. We see how a man can vanish without meaning to, how a people can move forward and forget, and how, sometimes, the ones who were left behind still have something to offer. Rip becomes a witness, a link, not to glory, but to memory. And perhaps that is part of the American soul, too. Not just building the new, but remembering the old. Next time on New American Mythos, we journey south along the Hudson to the haunted glen of Sleepy Hollow. There, we'll meet a lanky schoolteacher, a restless horseman, and the uneasy line between belief and doubt. Pride, folklore, and ghostly judgment await. Until then, keep your lanterns lit. Thank you for listening to New American Mythos. If these stories have stirred something in you, one of the best ways to support the show is by joining our community on Patreon. At the first tier, you'll receive early access to all episodes, plus 2 exclusive bonus episodes when the season concludes. At the second level, you'll receive a special gift in December, a free copy of this season's separate audiobook project, which is our modernized recording of Washington Irving's short novel, Old Christmas. This will arrive just in time to help celebrate the Christmas season. And for our top-tier patrons, you'll receive an early, limited edition signed copy of the bound collection of Season 1 myths, a tangible piece of the world we're building together. This volume is chock full of annotations, illustrations, and introductions. We think it will really help accent the stories that you're hearing through the season. A non-limited edition will be available a little bit later on for regular listeners to purchase. So, thank you for walking this road with us. Your support really does keep the lantern lit and ensures that these old stories can speak again.